Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, my name is Abba Moro. I represent the very good people of the Benue South Senatorial District, and by the grace of God and your support, the minority leader of the Senate. Mr. President, I want to make a few comments on the 2025 budget as presented by our President, His Excellency President Ahmed Bola Tinubu, GCFR. Yesterday, on the 18th of December 2024. Mr. President, looking at the budget as presented yesterday by Mr. President, we want to believe that if judiciously and effectively implemented, that Nigeria would be making a move in the right direction. But Mr. President, looking back at the 2024 budget and the level of implementation and the key elements that have been brought out by this presentation, there is cause for caution. Mr. President, the provisions for defense looks good on its face, and hopefully with proper timelines on the execution of the security arrangement contained herein, we want to believe that the issue of insecurity will become a thing of the past. And if that happens, Mr. President, I want to believe that all other things are likely to fall in place. But Mr. President, as I have always insisted, the United Nations Education Fund had postulated that 26% of every nation's budget should be devoted to education. Mr. President, Nigeria is far from meeting this standard. And if you go around our educational institutions, especially at the level of primary and secondary, our institutions are in serious states of disrepair that requires urgent repairs if our education foundation must be given the necessary impetus to grow. And so, Mr. President, I think that the provision for education in this budget also requires some review. Mr. President, today, the level of inflation, the cost of food items in the market, certainly is a story for everybody to tell in Nigeria. And so an inflation rate of 34.6%, certainly, Mr. President, is unacceptable. And while efforts are being made to raise or reduce the inflation rate, Mr. President, I still think that 15% inflation rate is still on the high side. Mr. President, the major problem of the Nigerian economy today is the ratio of the dollar to the naira. And so today, we're exchanging the naira for the dollar at 1,700. This rate definitely cannot grow this economy. If you go to any market now, the market woman that sells tomato talks about exchange rate. If you want to go and buy pepper, they talk about exchange rate. If you want to go and buy chicken, they talk about exchange rate. So exchange rate now becomes a standard of transaction, even though we are transacting in naira. And so, Mr. President, I think more effort should be made. 1,500 naira that is expected to be the exchange rate anticipated and encapsulated in this budget certainly is unacceptable. And so, Mr. President, I think, again, that needs to be looked into. Mr. President, the oil benchmark has been set. We all have seen it in our medium-term framework. I hope sincerely that we try to meet the standard so that we don't run into further deficit. And so finally, Mr. President, foreign exchange inflows. You will recall, Mr. President, that in some of our discussions in this chamber, we had said that because of our situation, generally, the insecurity, the exchange rate, all in all, that our investors are not forthcoming. And so I hope that if Mr. President keeps to his word and the budget works properly, we hope that energy provision will be seriously improved and our environment, especially security, improves, and we'll be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel in the present inflow of foreign investment that the government is anticipating. So all in all, Mr. President, I, as usual, would want to support the general principle of this budget, but also remember that in implementation, in the details, certain concerns that are raised here are addressed. I thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity.
I am Mohamed Tahir Monguno. I represent Borno North Senatorial District. Well, I adopt the beautiful and very erudite submissions made by the Deputy Senate President in respect of this bill. I want to further add that security of lives and property is the primacy of governance. And any government that fails and or neglects to protect the lives and property of its citizenry, that government is not supposed to last a minute longer than absolutely necessary, because that is the primacy of governance. Against this backdrop, I applaud the deployment of 4.91 trillion naira to defense and security in order to protect the lives and property of the people and for the people to engage in meaningful economic activity, especially agriculture in the northwest, the northeast, and north central, that is agrarian in nature as a result of challenge of banditry, Boko Haram, and what people don't go to the farm. So by deployment of this amount of money, it will go a long way in bringing sanity to all the nooks and crannies of the country that are security challenged. Then the other issue is with regard to infrastructure. The deployment of 4.6 trillion naira to infrastructure will go a long way in not only repleting the economy, but will generate a multiplier effect in the economy by way of creating employment and what have you. So that aspect is also applauded. But my main concern is budgets, no matter how beautifully couched, no matter how beautifully presented, if they are not implemented, they remain in the realm of mere estimates that will not translate into bringing concrete realities or concrete development to the doorsteps of the people. So because of that, I urge on the executive to follow up on the implementation of the budget. I can recall that Mr. President, in the course of his speech yesterday, alluded to the fact that the level of implementation of the budget stood at 48% to 50%. So by now, at least we should boost of at least 90 to 80% level of employment of the budget. So I think there is a need for the executive arm of government, particularly the Ministry of Finance, in conjunction with our Committee on Finance, to look at the issue of the policy of bottom-top approach that was introduced, that have constituted a cog in the wheel of implementation of the budget, to have a look at that system, because people are complaining about the bureaucratic red tape and bottlenecks that it has constituted in the process of implementation of the budget. So I think that aspect should be looked at, so that as beautiful as it is, as elaborate as it is, as aspirational as it is, it translates into bringing dividends of democracy to the doorsteps of the people and not remain as in the realm of mere estimates. Thank you.
and to resolve that he intends to turn around things for the betterment of the country. The budget proposal has clearly demonstrated the intention of the government in this regard. That's why the budget is christened Budget of Restoration, Securing Peace, Rebuilding Prosperity. Peace is sine qua non for a sound economy, for a sound and up and doing society. And we all know the problems we are facing in terms of insecurity. Now the government has taken the step to make sure that it deals with the matter in the best manner possible, to frontally deal with this matter. That's why the defense allocation is the highest, running up to 4.91 trillion naira. This shows the will of the government to deal with the problem of insecurity once and for all. To deal with the problem, make sure that there's no banditry, no insurgency, no nothing, so that the environment will be made conducive for a good society to thrive, for a sound economy to thrive. This is welcome, and we commend the President for taking the issue of security seriously. Then, of course, what do you need after you've taken care of insecurity? For a country that creates that environment of peace, what next go? What goes next is, of course, creating the enabling environment for the economy to thrive, for business to thrive, for the private sector to thrive. And how do you do that? By creating the necessary infrastructure, putting the necessary infrastructure in place. Good roads infrastructure, water supply infrastructure, all other infrastructure needed should be put in place. Power, everything. So now when you do that, you allow the real sector, other sectors of the economy to begin to operate, jobs will be created, and revenues will come in to various entities, and of course taxes will be paid, and the government will have more revenues, and those revenues will be channeled towards funding, social service, and so on and so forth. So you can see the trajectory of the arrangement, security, infrastructure. And then, of course, the next thing, what is very, very important in the contemporary world, it's not about natural resources that you have, but the human capital resources. Human capital is the key, is the number one factor of production, as you speak, in the whole world. And now the government has decided to allocate a big amount of money, 3.5 trillion. 3.52 trillion. So you can see the government is systematic in the way it has designed to deal with our problems. From peace to infrastructure, from infrastructure to human capital. Human capital. So this is something that we need to commend the President for doing, so that our men, our young men and women, young boys, young girls, our children, will now be able to have all those things needed for their education. This is a wonderful arrangement. And of course, the health sector is next. If you want your human capital to be up and doing, you should provide health services delivery system, so that they can be taken care of. Otherwise, the human capital you have, human capital you have, will become nothing if they are not given the necessary health support. Mr. President, and again, when you look at other items, other issues that have been taken seriously, like for instance, we've been talking about, we have the petroleum, but the ability to exploit petroleum has become a problem. We can't, before now, we are unable to even meet our OPEC quota. But now the government has determined that, look, this should be a thing of the past. We should try create the security needed to make sure that we are able to exploit as much as possible. Now, what has been earmarked to be exploited, is 2.06 million barrels. This is a welcome development. And I'm sure with the will that's been demonstrated by this president, by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, this will be actualized. And this is very, very good. Otherwise, we have the oil, but we are not exploiting, getting what we need to have. Mr. President, this budget has a lot of goodies that when we all work together and support the executive government, because it's not an issue of an hour government alone, it's an all-inclusive arrangement. We should all be part of the whole thing. The citizens should also be part of it. For us here, we need to oversight properly. All our relevant committees should work to make sure that when this budget is passed, we keep all those responsible for the implementation of whatever is in this budget on their toes, so that they work in the best manner possible to actualize what is in this budget. This budget is a wonderful arrangement, one of the best budgets ever produced in this country. But now what you need to do after the passage, we should all come around to make sure that we do all that is humanly possible in making sure that it's fully implemented. I'm sure by the time we implement this budget, this country will be turned to a land of El Dorado. El Dorado, land of plenty, land of prosperity. Mr. President, I urge all my colleagues to work around to make sure that we pass this budget without more delay, and also make sure that we stand in a way that we get the whole thing implemented for the good of this country, for the betterment of our people. Thank you, Mr. President.
The Chief Whip.
The center of Nigeria, the face of Nigeria, the insecurity is a lot. Even in the elite neighborhoods, people cannot go out at night. You cannot go for a walk without being kidnapped. So it is critical and vital to the survival of the economy of this country that insecurity should be taken care of, and everything else will fall into place. I so submit.
Thank you for keeping.
Align my thoughts with the commendation offered across party lines to Mr. President for the structure and content of the budget, as it were. The budget is, at best, a fiscal compass that explores perspectives of growth for a people. The attention to the major flanks of defense, of agriculture, of education are only to be expected, because when we get the foundation right, then we are well on the way to strengthening the very fabric of our democracy. We cannot sleep when our space is not safe. How do we drive investments when our borders, when our space is so insecure? So to this extent, the attention to defense is commendable. What I will want to suggest is that estimates like this necessarily call for a buy-in by the mass of the people. The budget as a compass is inspired when there's a buy-in by our people. We should not live in a country where some of us who have been privileged will look down on this country and call the country names from the comforts of our shores outside. This is a happy country. We are very proud people, very productive, and where a budget captures our very thoughts, I think that should be encouraged. We should not be festooned, as it were, to limitations of loyalties. Some of us, I've had cause to lament, appear to be more loyal to tribe than this country. And that is signposted by some of the comments that we read, even from our best friends outside this country. That should not be encouraged. Be it as it may, the implementation of this budget makes the entire difference. As I said earlier, a budget process signposts at best a compass. The critical issue is the implementation. One trusts that with the spirit that is driving us now, there will be greater attention to the implementation. Our people deserve the best. There have been concerns over hardship. There have been concerns over the pains that we are going through. But one believes that we are faced with happier days, that happier times are coming. But this also creates a challenge for us to see Nigeria as us, to see security as a common concern. We must not leave security only to the government. We must rise as a people and secure our space. We must own up our security architecture. That way, these estimates will be given breakthrough. And indeed, the common concerns that Nigerians have had would have been addressed. So on behalf of Akpabio South, there are prospects for this elaborate compass, as it were, and I trust that happier days are coming. Thank you.
Yes, good time.
My distinguished colleagues, I am Sadiq Suleiman Umar. I represent Kwara North in the Senate. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, today in Nigeria, our problem is both security and hunger. So I'm so happy that this budget is targeted at securing peace and rebuilding prosperity. So I thank Mr. President for having clear pathway and objective of what this country needs at this time. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, like I've always said, the only way to develop this country is to focus on the key legs that enhances human capital development, which is our education and our healthcare system. And this budget has clearly shown that Mr. President is focusing on that, allocating 2.48 trillion naira to health and 3.52 trillion naira to education. And of course, infrastructure, which is the major vehicle that development is driven, 4.06 trillion has been allocated. And as we know, we can't do any of this without having a secure country. And we have 4.91 trillion naira allocated to this. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, I have two concerns. One, I think, has been addressed here, that no matter what we do, as long as inflation continues to rear its ugly head, the Nigerian people will continue to suffer. And in paragraph 10, Mr. President said, our objective is to further stimulate the economy through the implementation of targeted fiscal stimulus packages, through public expenditures. We need all of this. But most importantly, Mr. President did say that it will be specific non-inflationary spending. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, this is critical and key. And this is what we have to monitor and follow carefully, so that as we are spending, it is not escalating inflation. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, lastly, we want to stabilize the Naira. The only major way we can do this is to ensure that we focus on manufacturing. Yes, Mr. President did say we have about 6 trillion surplus, but it has to be non-oil exports. And to do this, we have to focus on both trade, investment, and manufacturing. As at today, I have not seen the details yet, but we don't pay more attention to those who will help in manufacturing and sending products outside this country. We need to spend more in helping those who are manufacturing and producing, sweating, to make sure that we produce what we need and have excess to send outside the country. Thank you very much, Mr. President.